Welcome back, everybody. Steven here from Northwest Small Batch Brewing. It is time for your weekly brew chat. Pressure fermenting. So, first of all, you need a fermenter that can handle pressure fermenting. So we're talking corny keg, all-rounder, snub nose, little chubby. No, I don't know if that's a thing. Whatever you do, please don't use glass. So why even pressure ferment in the first place? There are two reasons I can think of. Number one is to do a no oxygen transfer. So if you have an IPA or something where you want to make sure no oxygen gets in it, you need at least a little bit of pressure to be able to move the beer from one device or one vessel to another. The second reason is that there was this craze that's sort of still going on where people want to make pseudo lagers, right? Beers that they don't have the ability to maybe temperature control during the fermentation and do a traditional lager. So instead, you're taking something like a Kveik yeast and you're going to ferment it warmer than usual because you can't temperature control it, and then you put it under pressure, and that helps hold back esters and flavors and off flavors and stuff that the yeast might put off normally if it were, fermented at a warmer temperature. There are some beers that benefit from being pressure fermented, and there are some that do not. For example, if you're making a Hefeweizen, you want those esters, you want the banana and clove flavors from the yeast. So you don't want to pressure ferment that and try to, hold that back, or you're not going to make the beer the way it's supposed to taste. Okay, before I give you tips on what PSI or amount of pressure to use for your pressure fermentation, let's talk about recapturing the CO2 so you don't have to use all of your CO2 that you buy to push the beer from the fermenter into another device. So let's start with the fermenter. You've got a fermenter that can hold pressure. You've got a jumper on it. Make sure if you buy a jumper that you look at the length of the tubing on it, because a lot of them, like the one I got, was awfully short. The jumper goes on the gas line of your fermenter, and then it connects to the gas line of your next device, like a corny keg in this case is what I'm going to use as an example. Now, you could end it with that and just put a spunning valve on the liquid side of that second device and control the pressure, as you want with that spunning valve. Or you could add a third device, a third vessel, and in the middle you have that vessel full of, let's say 5 gallons of sanitizer. And then as the CO2 is being pushed through, it's going to push the sanitizer up and into the other vessel, and that will ensure that that middle vessel is 100% CO2, and then you can use that to push your beer into another vessel without having to use a CO2 tank. All right, so now we're at the meat of the video. This is the secret tip that you don't really find on any other video for some reason. At least I haven't seen it. So let's talk about what pressure you should ferment your beer at if you're going to pressure ferment, because it runs the gambit. I've seen people say that they're trying to pressure ferment at 60 psi. So let me go through two things and I'll tell you the general thumb that I use. I wrote down a couple things here. So first thing is that yeast will die at 7,252 psi. The good news is you're not gonna have that kind of pressure. So you're not gonna have enough pressure to actually kill your yeast. However, more alarming is that yeast will stop growing at 37 psi. So that's a problem if somebody's fermenting at 60 psi, because they are halting the growth of their yeast and they're going to have some issues. And I think the reason people are trying to do that is because they're trying to make it so that when the beer is done, it's already carbonated, like drinkable carbonated, where they could just chill it for like a few hours and be ready to drink right off the bat. It's just not a good idea. So, keeping in mind that number, that you really shouldn't go over 37 psi, and you should probably stay clear of that range because that's when yeast stops growing. There are obviously two kinds of beer, right? You've got your ale and your lager. So the general rule of thumb that I follow and seems to work well is if you're doing an ale, you can do anything between 8 and 12 psi. Now, if you go at 13 psi, is that going to destroy it? Of course not. It's just, you know, if you want a range, that's what I would use, between 8 and 12. Lagers are a little different, and you can definitely ferment a little higher. For one reason, you may want to suppress even more of those esters, because lagers, you want them to be very crisp and clean and not a lot of yeast flavor or factor on them. So lagers, somewhere between 15 and 20 psi is usually good. I really don't see a need to pressure ferment over 20 psi. My opinion, that's how I do it. Well, it's not just my opinion because I did a lot of research on this and there are a lot of people that agree. But, you know, I mean, do you, whatever works for you. If you're fermenting at a higher psi and you haven't had any problem, Godspeed, my friend. That's it. That's the little tip and trick that you don't see too often, which is what pressure should I ferment at? And hopefully that gives you a little bit of information on how to get into pressure fermenting, why you do it, how you do it, and you can decide for yourself if it's something you want to get into. Hey, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate it. I will be back next week again with another video. So I will see you then, and until then, happy brewing.